Welcome to Inside the Numbers, the RockDaisy Sports Performance Podcast, where we decode the data, science, and stories powering elite athlete development. I'm Ron McKeefery, and in every episode, I'll be diving deep with top strength conditioning coaches, sports scientists, and performance experts who are driving the game forward using tech, insight, and grit. Welcome to Inside the Numbers, the RockDaisy Sports Performance Podcast. I'm Ron McKeefery, and I'm stepping in to host for Coach Cody Hughes. And in each episode, we break down the data, the methods and mindset behind elite athlete development. So let's get into it, man. Cody, this was super important for me to do, just a way to honor you and all the work that you've done with this podcast, and definitely wanted to kick this off and tell the story of your transition and just, some lessons learned from the podcast and those types of things. But man, just really quick, if this is the first time people have come across this podcast, quick Reader's Digest version of your journey so far.
Yeah, sure thing. First off, I just want to say thank you to you for taking the reins of this thing and taking off with it. It was an idea sparked by the guys. And there's not a whole lot of podcasts that are really shedding light on data and sports science, which is becoming more and more relevant every single day, and just how numbers affect our lives in sports performance. So one, I just want to thank you for being out for doing this for sure. But as far as I go, I was the host of this podcast for the last season and got to talk to a lot of great practitioners. But as far as I go, if you guys don't know anything about me personally, I was a college baseball player. Got into strength conditioning through collegiate playing, getting hurt, figuring out that I wanted to train athletes just from a lot of different areas. Getting hurt, seeing what PT was like, no, don't want to do that. I really enjoy coaching. And then dove right into the college gamut. Right, became an intern. Earned a GA spot from there, became a D1 assistant, and then quickly realized, I wasn't sure if I wanted to chase that ladder at the college level. So I decided, if a high school opportunity came my way, I was going to take it. And I did back in 2018 and then built the performance program at Madison Academy in Huntsville, from 2018 all the way to 2025. Was there for 7, 8 years and went from just being the strength coach to moving all the way up to being the assistant AD, making a lot of decisions in our athletic department in general, from game day experiences to marketing, fundraising, and bringing a fresh perspective from a performance coach perspective, which you don't see a whole lot of opportunities to be able to do that in that position. So I got to do that at MA. So now here I am. I've moved to Nashville. I'm in the private sector, been tagged to join Brian Kula to be the performance director of this new initiative called the Farm and Forge Club up here. That's going to be a world-renowned and premier tennis and performance facility here in Southeast Nashville, trying to create something from dust essentially, and in a startup plan here to create this performance facility. So that's what I'm doing now, and diving in it every single day. So
we want to dig into the current experience, but just for some more context there, where'd you do your internship and your GA at?
Yep. So internship was at Mississippi State football 2016 under the staff with Coach Nick Savage, Zach Ackenberger. And then even on that staff also was Coach Ryan Phillips, who's the head strength coach at BYU now, and Riley Allen, who's not in the industry anymore, but I was head strength coach at Ole Miss basketball most recently.
In that journey, there's so many philosophies, there's so many different principles, there's so many different ways of doing this. Was there a pivotal time? Was there a mentor, an experience that really kind of shaped, how you program and how you work with teams now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've got multiple, but they just have a theme. So it's really quick and easy to hit on them. So as a GA, okay, even as an intern, I learned how to work hard. I think that was the biggest one. I realized what this job was. So I was really thankful to that staff of challenging me there. To holy cow, like if you want to do this, this is for real. And it was kind of an eye opener of like, okay, if this industry is for me, this is what it takes. Thank you. Went to be a GA and I learned how to manage my time, right? So Coach Joseph Boyd was my mentor there. He was the head strength coach. I'm at a Division II level school where I was a GA and the only other strength coach. So I got thrown in the fire and instantly just learned trial by fire, how to program, how to make sure I'm staying organized, how to communicate to coaches, and made a lot of mistakes. But he really helped shape, what this looks like as a full-time professional. And then moved on to McNeese State University, where I was a full-time assistant for the first time. And I worked under Ben Souders, who's at the University of Arkansas now. And Ben really showed me what it meant to have a relationship with players, and also how to prove value to your staff, to a sport coach staff that might not exactly know our ins and outs. Made a lot of mistakes as a young coach there of thinking that I knew everything, trying to flex my knowledge rather than establishing a relationship with the people who actually make the most important decisions, which is the sports staff. I learned that a ton. And also I dipped my toe a little bit in developing other coaches there, being like the internship coordinator, which is kind of crazy. Like I had barely been a strength coach full time for not even a year. And all of a sudden I'm an internship coordinator and had a couple coaches under my belt there that went on to still be in the industry, which was cool to see. And then at Madison Academy, I cannot say enough about our head football coach there. His name's Bob Gotze, a guy who's been coaching for 30 plus years. I was very thankful to be able to step into a head football coach who was very old school in principles, but was new school in how to get things done and was always willing to learn and allowed me to run my show. But always kind of sprinkled in a little bit of tidbits and just how he truly captivated a team from a culture standpoint and how to do it the right way, and instill high level principles and habits and how he just did it from a high class standpoint. And then I had someone from afar, like people I didn't directly work with, right? We learned so much today on social media through, different associations, right? NSCA, CSCCA, NHSSCA, where I've become really great friends with a lot of great men, including like Mark Hoover, Tony Villani, obviously now Brian Kula that I get to work under, which is just tremendous. Of just taking a little bit of bits, Mark Hoover with some technology work, Tony Villani with his game speed and agility system, which I felt like I was really weak in. He really kind of helped put some structure around being able to develop that piece. Les Spellman, I've been able to work with Les now for, I worked with him in the last combine class and just pouring into some acceleration and speed work. Same with Brian and even Tony on the combine stuff. So there's been a myriad of people, that have poured into me, and I've been very blessed. I mean, I'm only as good as the people that's been around me, but all of those together have kind of started to shape and mold me on how I operate today.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, those you named some great names there. I was actually just speaking up at a conference with Mark and Tony, and got a chance to hang out with those guys, which was awesome. Les, I was actually just texting with earlier today. So I think it's, I think when you get to interact with those individuals, I think you can't help but get better as a coach. And ultimately
100%.
that's what it's all about is getting better as a coach for your athletes. And I think you would probably echo this. Having run Iron Game Chalk Talk for 7 years and you doing this podcast, would you say, give me some 1 to 2 takeaways from that experience and how, you learned from different guests, how you maybe exposed yourself to different thought processes that maybe, that wasn't the direction that you were going. And all of a sudden you maybe, about faced a little bit.
I'll even take this back to when I first had an idea for my own podcast back in 2022, I believe is when it was. I had an idea, I felt like I always spoke pretty well to people. And I always felt like in the new podcast world, there was only a few podcasts out there that ask good questions. And I remember playing baseball in college, listening to Iron Game Shot Talk. Like I remember it was awesome. I was like, I think I can do this pretty well. So dove right into it. I was a perfectionist. I wanted the audio to sound right. I wanted it to sound professional. But what I learned really quickly was like, how many different people and perspectives that I got from. Like I didn't realize how much as a host, because my first and foremost wasn't necessarily me to learn. It was like I want to create a platform for everybody to hear from professionals that I've been, able to find out about or learn about through Twitter or whatever. But man, just how much that I was be able to experience and then also establish relationships with people just from a 45-minute conversation that pay dividends down the road, just from people that had very specific knowledge in areas or just became friends in general, in this very tight-knit community, and doing that for an entire year. And I'm not gonna lie, like my hat's off to anybody that runs a podcast because it takes a lot of time and energy and systems, and you're doing it outside your full-time job and doing it for a long time. There's a reason why they say like if you've got more than 20 episodes posted, like you're like in the top 5% already of podcasts, like if you have 20 episodes done. So, I mean, it was a great experience. And then being able to do it also for the guys at RockDaisy who have been nothing but tremendous to me as a professional, because I think they have a high level product. And then being able to see how like my journey has changed from what I was interested in at the time, from just general strength and conditioning, learning people's stories. I think that's another huge one, man, is learning people's stories. Like, what's your story? Like, what you have a story to tell. You have a very specific perspective on training because of your story. And when you get that context, it helps you absorb why they did what they did. And you can take some nuggets from that and interject it into your life. Or you can discard it, because it doesn't fit your life, which happens all the time. So getting to be able to I probably interviewed over 100 people through that experience. And the amount of time that went into that helped develop me as a person and as a coach tremendously.
I think there's a lot of things that you said there that were key to me, especially going through that journey myself. I thought, when you start to think about what, outside of just your circle, your sphere of influence, and you start to think about what's marketable, what is people going to listen to, what are some unique perspectives, and all of a sudden you bring some people on that you're like, man, I don't know if I agree with this person at all. I don't know if I want to interview this person. And then all of a sudden, you have a 45-minute conversation like you did, and you're like, man, this is like if we were living right down the street, we'd barbecue every night, and
So I got a statement on that. So
yeah,
a great experience or story through that was Tony Holler. So people knew me on Twitter as kind of the guy that just liked to run his mouth, right? The guy that liked to always he had something to say about something. He always had some good things to say, but man, Cody's the one that was going to stir the pot. That was me probably 4 or 5 years ago. And Tony Holler, who is pretty polarizing in his views, and he stands on them strong. Me and him did not get along very well
sure,
online, and then we get around each other we get on a podcast and have conversations off air and then on air. We get to talk through and learn stories and context. And then all of a sudden we get to meet together at a conference. We're having breakfast together. We're having lunch together. Now, like we couldn't be more in lockstep of like, man, I really respect that professional. I think the biggest event was down at Tony Vellani's place at the Simply Faster Clinic when everybody was like Les was there, Tony Holler was there, Joey Garaccio was there, and just being able to like break bread with those guys. You realize really quick like these are humans too, like man, we
right,
could be friends as well, just because we don't agree on some things, just because Tony Holler may have completely different personal opinions or personal views than me. That doesn't mean that we can't agree on a lot of other things. And we're on the same mission. That's one thing we realized. Like, hey, you do realize we're on the same team?
that's
Like, we're
right,
on the same mission here to help kids
that's right.
and help coaches. So
Yeah,
that
love
was
that.
through the podcast helped me do that.
Well said. I think it's so eye opening. I think it's also okay to realize that you can disagree with people, and still be friends, and still have a different perspective. I think everybody kind of goes through those stages as a coach where maybe when they're young and they got all the answers. And then, I had a mentor, Marcus Anovich at Tampa Bay that, 30 years into his career, he was like, hey, look, I thought I had all the answers, but now I'm just starting to ask the right questions 30 years into this profession, get a different perspective and get a different viewpoint is such an important part of this process to stay relevant, to stay current, to continue to adapt and overcome. So I couldn't agree with you more. I want to dig in a little bit to your new experience now, and obviously a startup. You got a big job. This is a big opportunity with this organization, and obviously it's taking you a little bit away from this podcast. But man, what an incredible opportunity you got in front of you and a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's, I think I'm a builder at heart, and being able to take on a challenge that's like, hey, we're going to create something, and it feels risky, but it takes a lot of courage to jump into something like this where, all right, there's no systems in place. There's everything's from ground level. You even have some like core philosophical differences with a whole nother group being with our Tennis Academy and how they view performance training. And then making sure that we appease the owner and understanding like this is a business first and foremost. Like we have to find a way to generate revenue but also do things at the right way. And also, when you have something driving behind you that says there's going to be zero expense left off for you to have the ability to build something absolutely world class and elite. You ever heard about the coach that's like, if you can't coach in a field or in a weight room with rusty barbells and bumpers and you can't get it done, you're not a great coach? Well, now on the flip side of this is like, you're going to have every opportunity to have anything you want. You have literally zero excuse to not be an absolute elite coach and have an elite end product. And here we are building this thing out to be able to do that. But I think it's really exciting. I got a taste of the business, from all of my online training stuff, having people know my story of like, being able to try to force my wife to stay, like get my wife to stay home with the kids and develop multiple diversified streams of income and provide more value online. And I was really successful in that, and I got to see kind of what that is. And, I remember reading CEO Strength Coach when I was a senior in college and just knowing it, I had no
You're getting
clue.
so
Like
old.
that was just like 10 years, like that's been 10 years ago now.
Longer
So
than that.
like, yes, I was like, man, it's crazy to look at that story to see that, from being just focused on being a strength coach and then seeing the business behind it and then seeing the opportunities, layered on top of it, trying to be, deliver a product to, a market and now trying to step in and do this on a grand scale. It's challenging. But man, what an opportunity. I couldn't say no to it. And I have the absolute blessing of doing this alongside a guy who's already done it in Brian Kula, who developed a world-class performance company out in Denver, doing it the right way. His culture is off the charts. I've been there multiple times now. And being able to kind of get mentored by him. And that's what I told him too, was like, man, you know how good it feels to feel like a beginner again? Because at Madison Academy, I don't say this in a bad way or an arrogant way, but I almost started feeling like I was getting bored a little bit just because like we had a well-oiled machine that worked very well for that setting. I was stepping into higher levels of admin to provide more value, right? To solve more problems because that's what I like to do is solve problems. And but now, like I feel like I'm a whole like neophyte. Like I'm a beginner again, learning high level business, learning how to interact with people. Learning under Brian and kind of understanding like, training in this private sector world, man, is completely different. Like this whole periodization thing, you could throw that book almost out the window right now. Like that's not even something we're considering.
The family
Uh,
vacation and the holidays and everything that fits right into that schedule, I'm sure.
like, hey, Cody, we've got a young 14-year-old kid, soccer player, phenom, who has an agent, wants to come train for 2 days next week because he wants to get a feel for you guys. Ready, go. Whoa,
For sure.
totally different, right? I felt like I was an intern again, leading a warm up again. Remember the
Right.
first time ever. I'll never forget it. So that's another exciting part too, is that the growth that's going to come from this. So that's why it was super exciting.
Yeah, I think, anytime you get those, I mean, it's obviously, you mentioned the book. I mean, that's why I wrote that book, right? You have to be a success. You have to be three things. You have to be a great technician. You have to be a great manager. You have to be a great entrepreneur. A lot of times you go through those stages independently, and, that you get to that stage and you're not quite ready because you didn't build the foundation to support it. And then there's guys like you, there's guys like me that, we don't necessarily feel right if you're comfortable. Like if you're, if things are going well, like I don't feel right. So I got to mix things up and it's got to be chaos. And then I start to feel comfortable a little bit, in my own skin anyways. I couldn't, yeah, that's awesome, man. I'm so happy for you. And I think it's going to be a great opportunity. I'm sure people, if they come through that area, I'm sure you're going to be, once you get things going, open book. Quick story. I think I might've told this story before, but when I went for 3 years, I was traveling and working with teams all around the world and go to China and I'm coaching up the coaches the night before, and we're going through and we're setting up the weight room, and this is like 9 o'clock at night. And on the way out, I'm walking out, and I talk to the translator, and I'm like, "Hey, look, can you get me some bumper plates?" Because they were like, "Hey, whatever you need, can you get me some bumper plates? I'd like to have some bumper plates at some point." That's all there was. 6 a.m. we come back, and the entire weight room was cleared out, and they had stayed up and loaded up trucks the whole night, took everything out of the weight room, and we had no weight room to train this Olympic team. They went on to win a silver medal, actually. No equipment, no nothing. And they had thought that I said I didn't like the equipment, and they were getting all new equipment.
Oh, wow.
So for a week and a half, we had to train with time under tension and body weight and manual resistance. And so like all of a sudden you think you got this perfect plan, you got this perfect setup, the whole deal. And, then life throws you a curveball. So I think, the coaches that are, that think that there's this perfect setup, make sure you're developing the basics and challenging yourself like you are right now.
100%.
I want to dig into your program now, with when you're building this, when you're looking at, especially with this being a RockDaisy podcast and really focused on the numbers, what are one or two metrics that you're going to hang your hat on, that this is what's going to help drive our program?
Yeah, but I'm going to say this without saying it. This is like the easy answer, but obviously consistency and attendance. So you gotta make sure people are showing up. But outside of that, like two things I'm going to hang my hat on that I think are the simplest ones to execute if you have the technology and it's easiest to see progress in is both. So number one, so there's three of them. So number one's body weight, like just collect some body weights, right? Because one, you can see changes happen and just give you a little bit of an insight of what the athlete is based off their height and weight. Second is a 5'10" fly. So a basic acceleration, five-yard build, 10-yard fly. It's very low in yardage. So like getting hurt on that is really very low risk. Okay. It's an acceleration at heart and you have to push really hard to get a good score. And I think that you can move the needle on that very quickly, right? So it's the basics of acceleration, which every sport has on every level, right? Everybody's gonna accelerate in some form, and then a vertical jump. right? Can we just measure vertical jump, whether that's with a contact grid, a jump mat? I don't care if you have a vertex or if you got chalk on the wall, like just find a way to make it happen, right? And then based out of those three metrics, you got two more that you can have, right? With body weight and sprinting, which is momentum, right? So you can create a specific momentum number with that distance because momentum will change as distance changes, as you guys know, right? And then you can also calculate Swanson's power index with a vertical jump and a body weight. So the square root of your body weight times the square root of your vertical jump in inches, body weight in pounds, will give you somewhat of like a 0 to 100 power score in a vertical vector to show you how powerful you are. You know, I'll never forget. I think I learned that when I was at Mississippi State, and Riley Allen told me like, hey, if our guys are 80 plus, they're probably pretty powerful. Like if they're above 80, and then all of a sudden my thought was like, I'm going to run the numbers. You know, I've got the verticals, I've got the body weights. I'll create the formula and just run it, sort it. Oh yeah, that guy's pretty powerful. Oh yeah, that guy's pretty powerful. You know, and then the same thing like on the momentum, because then I love those metrics too. Because fast and jump high is like a small guy metric. You leave your big guys out. You know, like you
Right.
can't. The heavier athletes are like, well, I'm never going to be great at that. That's when you add in the power index and the momentum to show them that like, hey, just because your number might not be fastest in the group, we've got something else to look at and something that they can look at and hang their hat on, you know. And then from that, just trying to improve. You know, that's the biggest key. So those two, I would hang my hat on. I would carry those no matter who I'm training, what sport I'm doing. I would probably run those in any performance program I ever ran.
Well, what I love about that is, I mean, that's a stopwatch. That's a vertex. It's a chalk line. It's whatever you want. You know, it's not the very complex, you know, equipment that's out there. I'm sure those things are going to go in and the bells and whistles, and you're going to be able to do above and beyond. But when it comes down to it, I mean, two variables that you're going to, or three variables that you're going to hang your hat on, or things that can be done with a stopwatch and a clipboard. You know, and I
Yep.
think that's super important. So let's say you got your tennis team, elite, 14 to 16-year olds, whatever. They come through, you get all these numbers. Like, how those numbers going to drive your programming?
It's a great point. So in the beginning, it's funny because you'll have kids that'll do their first baseline testing and they'll go, "Was that good?" And I go, doesn't matter. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, here's the thing. One thing I can't control is where you're at right now. And all I care about is that I know that if these numbers go up over time, you've become a better athlete, right? So as far as like how we use it is this. Like number one, it gamifies the ability for the athlete to look forward to something to improve. It's really hard to do in the weight room because like you're trying to establish movement patterns. You're not trying to throw a one rep max underneath them really quickly. I feel like if you're halfway worth your salt, how are you going to try to show them some type of progress other than just like pure progressive overload? I would want a kid to be like, hey, what am I shooting for? You know, like, and then that's going to garnish effort, right? And then effort and then intent creates the stimulus to get better in the first place. So just pure power, from an acceleration, you have to have strength to do that. Like you do. So if we're learning the squat pattern, we're trap bar deadlifting, we're single leg, we're learning a hinge, we're doing all those things. It's probably going to help that early acceleration sprint, right? It's also going to really help that vertical jump, which are big rocks in our program. So it's almost like I'm reverse engineering, like, hey, this is kind of something that we are going to jump, of course, we are going to sprint because you need specificity, but at the same time, it's going to validate like some of the strength training we're doing too. So they can see progress quickly, and then they can have something to compete against and gamify the training. So that's like from the training standpoint. From a recovery standpoint, if our numbers are all of a sudden way off, it helps create a conversation because they're curious. Man, my numbers are slow. And then it's funny, like with a tennis kid I recently had, like if a kid ran like a 135 510 fly, and then he ran like a 138. And they're like, man, that's so much slower. And I was like, actually, no, it's not. It's a blink of an eye. I said, do you know the difference in those things? I said, that's actually really close. I actually really love that rep because you're really close, because then you start talking about how you collect that data. And like my biggest key I keep telling them is like, can you keep beating your average? Like if you have an average data in a certain can you just be better than that average? Then that automatically tells you you're getting better. Not just trying to beat your PR because we know that doesn't happen because, with our athletes, they come in fresh, they're probably going to run the best they've ever ran. And then once we add a training effect, they're going to be a little under fatigue. So their sprint numbers are going to go a little bit slower in weeks 2 and 3. And they don't understand that. They're like, why am I getting slower? I said, you're not. You're just being trained in a training effect and a stimulus for the first time. And sprinting is one of the toughest things to put together performance wise if you're not fresh. So it's an education moment, teaching them about how the body receives stimulus, how to recover. Well, how do I recover? Then you start talking about nutrition, sleep, hydration. It just starts to lead into all those things. So like it's a rolling ball, right, of how it affects our program. And then readiness, showing them what fresh feels like, showing them what training feels like, giving them an understanding of like, hey, when we try to peak for a tournament and we want to feel our best, we shouldn't do more is not better. Right. Because if you're doing so many hours of tennis and you're constantly just more, grind mode, and you start to, you don't feel great going to a tournament that matters, maybe we need to rethink our strategy. Or maybe there's a tournament you're playing to develop and it's not that important as far as performance goes. So we train through. We understand that I might not feel great, but I need to play because I need reps, right? I need to have tournament experience, but we're training through it. And that's all being talked about on the front end because we started collecting numbers. It's really hard to get that conversation started by just being authority, right? If I'm just the expert, so you just have to believe me. Well, I really like to kind of separate myself from me and like it's this, it's these
Right.
numbers, and then explain it into them that also belongs to them. It doesn't belong to me. I'm just doing a way to try to paint a picture and to tell a story that helps them step on the path we're trying to provide to high performance. So that's simple. And to me, that's the data story. It's not what you call what you track. Like there's a million things you could track. Pick it. Like, can you be
Right.
consistent in it? Can you repeat them? Do you feel good about it? Like there's 100 different ways to track. I mean, like, all right, you want to track, why aren't you tracking broad jump? Oh, you're doing vertical, but you're not doing broad jump? That's just a nuance. That's a nuanced question. Of course you can track broad jump. Why not? Also, why do you want to track a million things if you can't execute or tell a story? If you track too many things, it makes the story pretty complex, or it makes your job really hard because you're trying to aggregate all these data points that could just simply be overkill. So I like simple, I like priority, and I like telling the story. I think that moves the needle.
Yeah, some great points there. Are you doing anything when it comes to, so you're kind of got the strength and power, kind of athlete segmented out, strength and power. Are you doing anything different within the training program to kind of individualize it for them? Or are you adding additional work to the end for them to do? How are you going about kind of making that training outside of just what's going to happen naturally in training? How are you kind of focusing in on those two qualities?
Yeah, I mean, so let me make sure I hear you right. So how am I individualize it for these kids is what you're saying, like
Well,
inside
once
the program?
if you get a fly 10 and all of a sudden it's they don't have the power or they don't have the strength to produce a better number, are you doing anything differently with them in the weight room?
Oh yeah, good point. So I mean, the answer is no, because like a lot of them are developmental, and I keep telling them like you have to trust this process. The favorite infographic I like to show them is like if you zoom out on progress, it looks like a straight line.
Yeah,
If you zoom in, it looks like this. you
yeah,
know like so like teaching them that it's a constant stress recover, and it's a non-linear experience, and to not hang your hat too hard on these numbers, because I think that's where numbers come into play, is that you think numbers are so great for intent, but then all of a sudden numbers can also lock a player up from a psychology standpoint because they're just obsessed with it. I've noticed that with some of our pros, like some of our NFL guys we're training in July. You got to be careful with some of these guys, who they're ultra competitive and they all of a sudden like get wigged out because the jump was an inch lower. And I'm like, well,
right.
there's an education moment, but you also have to know your player, at the same time. So trying to make sure like, hey, don't take with this personally. No, don't identify with all these numbers. Understand. So we try to educate on the front end, what that's for. But like if we see something totally off cuff, like something like a run that's way off, two things. Is something bothering you? Like, are you hurt? Or why is your effort down? Like, are you in a bad mood? Is you just don't want to be here today? Is something going on? Are you okay? Like I have had a gazillion of those conversations at the high school level because they happen. I
Right.
mean, kids
Sure.
have to be there, and they're just like, I'm just going to half-ass this one. And but that creates connection. When the coach notices, like, oh, he noticed. How did he know my number was off? Like, well, I've got a rolling average number, and I know that when it's off because it's just right here in front of me when we're executing. It's not just so like investing into that number two and then investing into the person. They invest back, invest into it. So, and just tell them like, hey, like, your numbers aren't going up yet because we've got to get a lot stronger. That's why on that trap bar deadlift, whenever you're focusing on your technique, and when we need to go up 25 pounds and you've got to be able to buy into that. Like we've got to lift some heavy weight.
Sure.
to produce some force. And they're like, okay, I get it. So yeah, that's what I would do.
It's a little bit of a loaded question, obviously, with it being a Rock Daisy podcast and you being an advocate. How are you communicating? And I think, when you use like a power index or you use some of these things, right? Newtons or watts or something like that. Like there's some brilliance in that where you're just like, you're talking over a coach's head and they just don't understand it. So like, yeah, it's going up. That's great. Right. But also you want informed coaches. You want them to understand. So how are you taking these numbers, putting it into a way that it's not just a leaderboard, right? You're just rewarding the genetically gifted, but you're communicating that information to a coach that's maybe not a numbers person.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think on the front end, you need to talk with that coach and ask questions that are going to give you some numbers answers without it being a numbers question. Coach, what do you value? Obviously my basketball coach likes guys that jump high and play above the rim. I know he's going to like our guys that jump high, right? I even took from volleyball into basketball, like, all right, we know that coach likes to see vertical and what someone can touch, not necessarily how high they can jump, because that's going to affect who gets on the court. Because if we have a kid that can touch 11.5, that kid can play above the rim. You're probably going to be valuable for us. So in like conversations like that, like what do you like? What's valuable to you? Football coaches, how big our guys are, and how well they move. Can they create a collision? I had our defensive coordinator constantly ask me for special teams. Hey, who do you think's really fast on our list? Like I've got our top 10, like 5'10" fly guys. Who do you think would be best to try to block a punt? Like he asked me that question. I was like, wow, that's kind of crazy that you're coming to me to find somebody who could be that, or who's best on kickoff, right? Do we have somebody who's got a decent amount of body weight on them, but also can run somewhat, so when they collision, that they can somewhat do some damage? Who do we got here? Here's your top 10 coach. Who do you trust the most? Great, thanks. I mean, that simple, right? So understanding their value, and then I'm collecting internal data between me and my staff to look at the whole project, right? Holistic development. And that's a lot of internal. But after I've had conversations with coaches and trying to profile that, and number one, every coach wants to see improvement over time. How do I make that simple? Week to week basis, quarter to quarter basis, semester to semester basis. I mean, you can argue all you want, but even the coaches that made it as simple as pre-test, post-test, we're going to max in the beginning, we're going to max at the end. Ooh, look, we got better. Coaches signing off on that. Okay, if that's what coach values, you need to consider that. Maybe you've done a lot more testing, side of it because you've seen internally. Okay, I know where we're at, but you tell the story that coach wants to see, and have that type of relationship. So I think it's really important to try your best to not talk over a coach's head. Like, I'm not saying dumb it down and talk to them like they're a third grader, but it needs to be easy and quick. Like, if you can't have this conversation in 3 minutes, just about effectiveness, maybe you haven't really fully grasped the concept yet of it being valuable. Because I remember as a young coach, I was getting infatuated with this stuff and started talking all these, meters per second, newtons, watts, this, that, and another, power, peak power, this. I'm like, coach has got so much on his plate. Like, he needs to know if our guys are getting better. He's already told you what he wants to see. Can you relay that in something that's easier to understand? And that's like what the momentum number did for our defensive coordinator. I was like, the analogy of whole, like, all right, we've got a wall down there, and we're gonna stand back here and take off running. Who's gonna make the biggest dent in that wall? I can get with that. The bigger the number, the better. Okay, quick. They're like, don't even worry about newtons. That is the momentum number, right? But it is tough too sometimes of like how numbers are so arbitrary. Like what's 1.32 meters per second?
Right.
What is 1.32? It's whatever. So like even when we're taking scores, like if you get granular, and I actually learned this from Les, you try to standardize a score. So like you can take you get a sprint, for example. Like if you got a 5'10" fly, I know for a fact that 1.15 time is probably going to be the fastest we're going to get. Like that's extremely fast. That's a max score, right? You can take the average of an entire data set, right? Or you can take a score itself and divide it by its max score, right? And then divide that number or multiply that number by 10. It's going to give you a 1 to 10 score. 10's great. One's not. Similar to a Z score, but more standardized.
Yep.
So like sometimes coaches don't really know Z score either. But trying to get things like, I was like, look, if I can get 0 to 10 red, yellow, green, I think coach will probably like it. Like we fully invested in VBT and Vitruve in our program at Madison Academy, and our coach loved bar speed just from an intent standpoint. And I made it really simple that on the screen, based off our velocity floor and needing to get there, if it was gray, I ain't get it. If it's green, we're good. Coach, you see green, we're good. And that's all he needed to know,
Yeah.
from an inner training standpoint. It's gray, we got to go, come on, we got to go. And there's a lot of reasons why it could be gray, right? But he doesn't know that, and that's okay because he just wants to walk and coach and drive intent, which I know is always good. So just little tidbits, here and there about how to simplify those data things but then internally you can go as deep as you want to
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think simplifying the data in a way that they understand, but I think more importantly is like giving case studies. I think the flying 10 with the coach with the special teams correlation, I think that's huge. I think whether that's that or maybe using like a reactive Y to indicate maybe at the high school level who your better defensive players versus your better offensive players, who's reacting versus who knows exactly where they're going, right? I think when you can relate it back to their world, that's the secret sauce, And I think then using tools like RockDaisy and things like that, making spider graphs, keeping it consistent amongst that age population, that area, that current group, or maybe groups that you've coached at that school. That keeps it where it's relative, right? And you're not, you're going against a combine number with 14-year-olds, something along those lines. But
Right. Yeah, I mean, it was really cool. I even developed and I'm trying to refine it, like a star system, like
yeah,
in our program, where I knew at that point I had so many data points of what was really good for all of our strength, speed, size, muscle mass, because we had like an in body, and create like those 0 to 10 scores for all of those things, and then create an average, and then you could multiply that by 10 to have it 0 to 100 and give you a star reading and things like that the kids love. Because like once they started seeing that. And we had enough data points to make it very. I was like, guys, also keep in mind this is a Madison Academy specific thing.
right.
Like this scoring system is just this is just representing us here. Like I can't like don't to tell them like just because you are the 5-star in our building doesn't mean 5-star anywhere else. Like keep that in mind. Like I had to say that, but it excited them about training. Like how do I get that score up? Oh, I'm a bigger kid and I'm strong, but if I can get my speed up just a little bit, my star would go way up. Yeah, it would. So little things like that go a long way.
Yeah, we were playing with that as well, just trying to, essentially playing off the Madden score, and trying to give them a Madden score. But well, good man. Well, I want to, just do a quick fast finish here. I know you're busy, man. This is awesome. We could talk all day long, but give me one performance myth that you'd love to bust.
I mean, it's really hard. I mean, this sounds so cliche, but like that more is better as a concept has to go. I realized really quickly that like if you actually constrain yourself on volume, it makes you 100 times better coach because you have to trim the fat. You have to. And if you can be just as effective with less energy, you got an opportunity to be more healthy, higher recovered, and you're going to be able to be a lot longer lasting. Even building capacity that way. But it's so innate in our nature, right? That if I just work hard, I can fall back on that. I think that coaches fall back on that. Hey, if we got beat, we were the hardest workers in the room, and you don't realize how counterintuitive that can be for performance.
Right.
And I say that with a caveat of like you can't not be a hard worker. Like it's kind of wild to me that like some programs like hang their hat on hard work, and I'm like, guys, that's a prerequisite. Like we don't not work hard. That's crazy. Intensity will be high, focus is high. Like if you don't work hard, you don't have a shot. Like I'm sorry. I remember our head coach back at the old school I was at would always say, if you're going to be stupid, you better be tough to make it in this world. Like being tough is important. So like hard work is just getting you in the door. Hard work's not special. Like it's not. Now let's try to be effective and efficient at the same time. So how can you, it takes a lot of work to look at your body of work and see if you can really pinpoint on the things and trim the fat. Because if you got all the time in the world, you got 4 hours a day to train, you got all the resources, like you probably aren't that efficient, but you may be somewhat effective because you've got all this and that. But what if you were efficient and effective and then you bought some time back and then you can figure out how to be efficient, effective with that time. And now you've kind of exponentially increased your abilities and how much you're getting done, So more is better is just something that's got to be. I'm always going to preach that concept.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. There's some nature law that it basically the work expands to the time that you have. So if you have 30 hours, it's going to take you 30 hours. If you have 3 hours, it's going to take you 3 hours. And I think that efficiency is the key word there. I couldn't agree more with that. What's a favorite coaching resource that a book, a podcast, a website?
Sure thing.
Tony's court.
Yeah. So I'm going to go a little different here. There's a book that I've reread now 3 times that I think every coach needs to read, and it's called Crucial Conversations by Joseph Grenny. And it talks about how to communicate when emotions run high and the stakes are high. Like that is huge, right? Not just from a coaching standpoint, but from like a relationship standpoint with anybody. Your athletic department, your AD, heck, even your spouse, and learning for like coaches on staff of learning how to be an effective communicator and learn when a conversation turns crucial. Like an example of that is when different opinions are all of a sudden apparent. Oh snap. We totally have different viewpoints on this. Well, do I have a skill set on how to operate within that so I can be honest, but I can also be respectful, and then we can get something out of this conversation. Because the people that do that and close that loop with speed go way further because everybody else will. The most common thing is to just give cold shoulder and ignore it and act like nothing happened. And then it just sits there and it never gets addressed. And then it shows up in other places. I mean, it's just dysfunction as a company. It's dysfunction as a staff. It's dysfunction in a marriage. That book right there gives a really good framework that I think if you want like just personal development for yourself, or if you're a coach with a staff, I highly suggest go through it. It's really good. It's an easy read. It develops a framework that I think everybody as a communicator get a lot out of.
That's high level stuff right there. That gets into the manager, piece. Because I mean, you can know all the sets, reps, impressions, regressions, but if you can't get people to do it, buy into you, then it's a quote, or not necessarily a quote, but just something that you would want up on the wall in the weight room that everybody needs to see.
I've hung my hat on this phrase now for 7 years, and I've stole it from two people, and I always give credit. Health drives performance. Play more, play better. Like that's my philosophy. Everything bounces off of that, and I'll always say who I get it from. Health drives performance. Got that from Alan Bishop. He's been a mentor of mine. I could have mentioned him earlier in the episode. Just talking about how health drives performance, meaning that it's really hard to perform at a high level if we don't focus on our health, right? If we go into something, and at the end of the day, if you're hurt, you're on the bench. You don't help us, right? And at the same time, it's an interesting dichotomy that it's actually not healthy to pursue high performance. It's not healthy. It's hard, right? But it drives it, right? So keep that in mind. And then play more, play better is our goal. I want you to play more snaps, play more innings, play more matches, but also want you to play better, like more and better. That's strength conditioning in a nutshell, right? Health driving performance, play more, play better. I'm hoping, I don't know if our owner will let me slap it on the wall in this new awesome facility we're building, but I'm dang sure I'm trying.
Awesome, man. I couldn't agree with you more on that for sure. What's with all the things that you got going on, I know you're active on social media. I know you're obviously you're busy these days, but where can people stay up with you?
Sure. I'm really active on X, Twitter, and Instagram. CLH_strength is where you can find me. I tell my story there. I'm pretty active on there. I respond to pretty much every DM, and I'm a huge voice notes guy. So if you get a message from me, I'm going to shoot back a voice note because typically I'm really busy on the run. If I'm in the car, I can just hold my phone up and give you a 2-minute response that's really in depth rather than trying to type all that out. So you can hit me there, no problem. I have a website, clhstrength.com. There's a couple of resources and stuff there as well. I've written some articles for Simply Faster and a couple other people as well, but no problem. Yeah, I'm easy. I'm an open book. I'm always trying to have dialogue with coaches. So feel free to reach out if you have any questions.
I said at the beginning of the episode, and I'll say it again, just really appreciate all the work that you've put into this. And I know being on the episode before was a great time and a good chance for us to get to know each other better. And I hope I do this justice by taking it over and continue to build off what you've laid a great foundation on. And appreciate RockDaisy. I know we both do. The guys there, Chris and Elvis and everybody, there's just some great humans that are doing it for the right reasons, the right way. And it's a product that I used at Washington and would highly recommend for people as well. But man, really appreciate the time and so wish you nothing but the best for this new adventure.
Thank you. I'm going to need it. Just hit stop. Everything should